Hi. Hi, Charlotte. Hello. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
How are you doing? You okay?
Yes, good. Thanks to you.
I'm very good, thanks.
Good.
Let's start off. I thought probably you had forgotten, so I dropped you a code again just in case.
Yeah.
But that's great that you've joined. What we're going to do is obviously just start with the discussion on learning outcome 4 on this particular unit, which is resource management that we are studying. So I'm just going to briefly switch you over to the unit spec just to do a quick bit of recap. So what we've done so far in the unit is we've gone through some of the bits in terms of understanding, as I mentioned earlier, some part of this unit is more to do with, human resources management and what has happened. So what has happened in this case in this unit is that when we look at bits and pieces in terms of looking at resources overall, whether it's physical, infrastructure, financial, human resources. So the unit has, quite nicely, let's say, linked in different types of resources. And that's why the holistic approach of learning, resource management. And the first one, we looked at, what are the key features of resource management, essentially. So things in terms of different sectors in the economy, primary, secondary, tertiary. We looked at, what are the different types of resources, physical, tangible and intangible resources. And then what could be the factors which could affect human resources in particular, or factors which could affect, workings of the company and the organization from outside. In the second learning outcome, we specifically focused on physical resources. So what is physical resources? Things like raw material, building, infrastructure, machinery, equipment, and, trying to understand how companies look at reducing waste when we talk about the utilization of some of these resources. So some companies produce, they are classed as primary because they produce goods and services from the raw material or, the goods which are taken out from the environment. Secondary ones tend to be which are processing it, and obviously that is where the processing of resources when happens can lead to a lot of wastage. Looked at understanding costs, technology, the impact of technology on how wastage of resources can be minimized. And then we look at specific examples of corporate social responsibility, the elements of it, to understand how businesses look at ethical practices and sustainable practices in order to ensure that they can reduce the amount of waste going into the landfills or waste going into recycling. The third learning outcome was more to understand human resources. So nicely going into from understanding what is resource management, going into physical resources, then the third one went to human resources, and one such resource which is able to manage all the other types of resources. So the idea was to understand recruitment and selection, key functions of human resources department within the organization, and in terms of how does the HR department go about planning resources from a point of view of manpower resources, in particular when a company is looking at expansion, or when an organization is going on a let's say expanding offices overseas, or launching operations in other geographies. And then we looked at how motivation and leadership play a role in terms of ensuring that people who are working within the organization are motivated. They are motivated because of various reasons. Some of them are looking at financial motivation, some are looking at rewards, some are looking at reputation, and obviously also briefly touched upon what could be the methods through which performance of employees could be evaluated. So things in terms of performance appraisal, 360-degree feedback, looking at KPIs or key performance indicators. And then in the end, for distinction criteria, we were focused on understanding the impact of human resources and the engagement of HR department in particular. How does it affect the motivation workings of people, employees, staff within the organization, and how does the HR become a link pin between the management and the organizational objectives to ensure that everybody is singing from the same songbook. And this is where we have taken an example to look at the impact of HR engagement in particular, and the role of HR in particular to engage with employee staff, and people within the organization to keep them motivated and, chugging towards achieving the goals and objectives. Now, in the last learning outcome, we are focused on understanding review. how do we look at reviewing the effectiveness and the use of these resources? So this is where we are again focused on, because we've studied in the last learning outcome, the resources in basically human as a resource, or people as a resource, is what we've studied. So in this particular learning outcome, we are focused on understanding how the review and, let's say, performance review of staff, employees, and people working within the organization is done, and how does it contribute to the success and failure of businesses. And this is where we've been asked to look at some examples. So here, towards the end of the unit specification, when we look at the indicative content, there are bits and pieces given in terms of how employee performance is monitored and maintained in terms of key metrics, things like absenteeism, sickness leave, or statutory sick leave. We look at how they are performing against targets. Obviously, when we look at customer feedback and feedback in general through the performance appraisal, you will be looking at some of the tools and techniques that HR uses to get feedback about if staff, employees from customers in terms of how the service has been delivered. And this is something that we see pretty much day in, day out when we use some of the services, whether it's banking or it's insurance or it's mortgage. You always are served with some sort of a survey or an interview towards the end to say, could you provide us feedback, in terms of how the staff has behaved, or what the services have been offered, and what to your satisfaction and things like that. Now, in terms of utilization of physical resources, we'll be taking up an example of Primark or Marks and Spencer, and what these companies have embarked on in terms of how to better utilize some of the physical resources so they can help reduce cost. They can look at obviously increasing performance in terms of output for the business, and in general look at how do they look at setting targets, and how does the company go about meeting some of the qualitative targets which organizations have in terms of 5-year plans and 3, 5, 10 7, 10-year plans that the organization have in terms of shaving costs or reducing costs, and also in terms of looking at how does the company expand and grow its operations, become more productive, more efficient. Now, there are some companies which have been suggested to look at following resource management practices. Companies like Amazon, Sports Direct, Carillion, Capita, and Ryanair. You could pick out any of this company, apart from the ones that we've discussed in the unit and the discussions on the sessions, to do your assignment. Now, this would be useful because if you have a company and you keep that consistently across some of the tasks that you do, it'll help you to do a research thoroughly on the company itself, get all the data, which is what you need, for examples and showing applications from the company website. And there's plenty of, resources and data available through the corporate website of some of these companies. When they talk about resources in the annual general report, the amount of money which is spent, budgeting which has been done, specifically related to manpower, staff costs in particular, salaries in particular, and then how appraisals and performance measurement for some of their key management staff is done. So there's plenty of data available for some of these companies, and it'll be easy if you choose one of these which is given to do your assignment at a later stage. Now, in order to discuss the outcome, this particular learning outcome, what we want to be looking at is a few bits of detail through the PowerPoint slide that I've got. And here is what we are going to discuss, some of the key concepts first, and then later on go into some of the assessment criteria for the unit. Now, we will be broadly covering pretty much everything. I think in terms of the example, I would want to refresh, but I have not taken up anything. I think yesterday when I drew the presentation up for the other unit, Amazon is what I've taken up as an example, Amazon Go in particular, or Amazon shopping in particular. But I think I will try and change some parts of these slides maybe later on to try and see if I can include Amazon into this as an example to discuss some of the assessment criteria. So for now and for today, I think I've used Primark and Marks and Spencer to the organizations wherein we will cover some of the bits related to how they review the performance of employees within the organization and what kind of data is generally connected, sales from various departments, which then feeds into the data for HR, and then at some stage, appraisals, management of various objectives within the organization is done. Now, let's look at some of the key terms which are going to come up again and again in this discussion, and they would be when we look at some of the assessment criteria, one of the terms which will stand apart, which has come across to us in Learning Outcome 3 as well, is employee performance. Then we will again look at physical resources. This is something that we've covered in Learning Outcome 2. And then we'll get into some of the other terms which are pertinent and I don't think have been covered in any of the other learning outcomes that we've discussed. But it is going to be just related to understanding some parts of it, so that from an HR perspective, when we talk about absenteeism, sickness, performance appraisals, targets, KPIs, these are key terms which are used by HR managers. And obviously, if you're aware of these terms, it obviously would be helpful for you to understand the context and the topics better in the unit. So let's start off with what is employee performance. In literally, when you look at performance as a word, we are talking about in terms of understanding, how you're doing, or how sometimes your manager would come across and say, how are you doing in your job, or how are you finding your day-to-day job. So what the manager or the person who's asking this question is basically asking you to do is, or explain, sorry, I'm going to bad cough, is he or she is basically hinting and understanding how are you performing your task, how are you doing your day-to-day activities, and what, if at all, any hurdles are you facing or issues are you facing when you are basically looking at fulfilling your duties. So when we relate this to employee performance, most employers are essentially, wanting to understand that, okay, given the task, given the work and the remuneration which the employees being paid, because the employee is costing the organization, at the end of the day, something on the P&L, they want to understand how good are you at fulfilling your duties, how good are you in your role, in the responsibilities that are given to you, and how quickly you execute them, how efficiently you execute them. And they also want to find out how the work that you do helps in contribution towards achieving the overall objectives of the organization. So at the end of the day, head of the department or your manager is responsible for ensuring that, okay, if he or she manages 3, 4, 5, depending on the size and scale of the organization, 10, 15, 20, maybe hundreds of employees, then in those cases, that person is responsible for the P&L or, profit and loss for the department. And in those cases, they are clearly needing to justify the expense of the manpower or the, manpower cost that they are looking at budgeting for. And towards the end of the year, are they able to increase or show incremental increases in business? Now, this incremental increases business could be, depending on the department you work at. If you're in sales, obviously sales turnover. If you're in marketing, probably could be related to targets which are on market share. If you are working within HR, it could be basically looking at, processes, policies, procedures being followed, any costs which the company could incur because of negligence or, risks which are created because of actions of others. And if they can be minimized, that would help shave cost. If you're in the administration department, it's the bit in terms of the resources, physical resources which the employees use. Sometimes you do see that departments do not order paper or stationery or things like that, and then the costs for those are calculated on a monthly, quarterly and yearly basis to see what has been in the increase of cost. And organization and various departments would put various processes in place to say, okay, we are shifting to a paperless, office. In some cases, switching off the electricity for administration. When you go towards the end, the last person out, has the responsibility of switching off, AC, or in some cases, it's down to how the functioning of this is organized within the office. At the management level, it tends to be more of management in terms of achieving qualitative objectives. And all this is related to, at some stage, evaluating the performance of employees and departments and the cost that the departments are spending in terms of making these resources available to staff, employees, people, partners, suppliers, contractors, when they are executing or, dealing with roles and responsibilities or daily tasks which have been given. Now, when we talk about physical resources, as we all know, would be tangible resources, things like, office equipment, printer, copier, PC, laptop. It could be building the office premises, parking, vehicles for management. Sometimes if companies have given out, have a policy wherein you're able to, get a car or a vehicle from the office for official uses and purposes, all these will be termed as physical resources. Now, physical resources generally are, used for the operations of the business, to drive the business operations. If a company is a manufacturing company or an engineering company or a production company, if they don't have a factory, if they don't have equipment to produce goods, there will not be a business. If you're a services business, if you work within a call center, the company offers call center services, obviously there will be physical resources required like PCs, dialers, software, and headsets and phones and infrastructure. And this would be used in conducting day-to-day operations of the business, which is what they are providing services for. And in return, clients are paying them for their services. Now, some of the other context in terms that we look at in terms of absenteeism. So when we look at, literal meaning of the word absenteeism, basically means you are looking at employees taking day off. You're looking at employees regularly taking days off because of sickness or because of major injury. And in some cases, offices and workplaces and organizations have what is called a statutory sick pay. Now, as per rules and regulations, obviously all companies are required to pay statutory sick pay. The sick pay starts after the third day of being sick. And obviously, in some cases, some companies ask employees to bring in a sick note from the GP if you've been off, or a self-certified sick note in some cases works, because what the organization wants to do is, because when you're employed and you're working full-time, you're being paid a salary. So at the end of the day, the HR is responsible for ensuring that employees do come in and work, and they are looking after and HR is to a certain extent looking after the welfare of the employee as well, isn't it? So in some cases, you would see absenteeism. If there is a high level of absenteeism, that means you're absent from the company for a longer duration of period or longer duration of time, and there is no reason or underlying reasons for you to be absent or taking days off, then in some cases that leads to a review, and a review can also lead to a termination of your job, or you losing the job at the end of the day, because employers would look at absenteeism as a way wherein it is not being proactive. The company is incurring cost, and somebody else or a co-worker in this case is picking up some of the work which is required to be done by an individual, which is obviously absent from work for no good reason. So in some cases, statutory sick pay is paid when you're injured, when you're sick, long-term sickness, and as per policies which are present in most organizations, statutory sick pay or SSP is generally paid out after the third day. In most cases, in most organizations, and it tends to be an amount restricted to about, I think, £123 and some pennies, if I remember correctly. And obviously, once you come back to work, the employer expects that the employee would get a sick note or a note from the GP to say, okay, you were off because of such and such, reason, and that is the cause. And obviously, that is used and filed and kept in your file as a record. So that this then can be used at a later stage when performance appraisals are done, because the number of days that you don't work, that means the number of days the company has lost out in terms of work and productivity. So obviously, when they calculate the cost that they are incurring because of you being employed and taking days off apart from the holidays, which are allowed, like 20+8 or 28 national, 20+8 total 28 holidays. If you're costing too much for the company, then in some cases appraisals are done, or midterm appraisals are done, essentially to explain the reasons of why the company is looking at terminating your job or your employment. Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots and lots of ways through which performance appraisals can be done. Now, one of the ways that we can look at understanding why is performance of an employee needed to be evaluated. So one of the fundamental question which would come to anybody's mind is that why is my performance needing evaluation, or why do you need to review my performance within the organization? So the reason why performance evaluation is done, and there are various methods for it. One such common method is performance appraisal, but this tends to be because it's an important tool for understanding whether the work which is required to be done is being carried out by the individual for which you are being given a job description, for which you are being paid a salary, and in some cases, in order to review your progress, review and find out how you're doing in terms of the work which has been given to you and how you're faring on that work. An appraisal or a review of your performance needs to be done. So an evaluation serves as an opportunity for reviewing the set goals, both for the individual as well as for the organization. And they want to see, when I say they, I mean HR wants to see your contribution towards the fulfillment of that goal which the organization is striving to achieve. So again, different types of goals can be set. For marketing, it could be a market share goal, it could be a competitor goal. For sales, if you're in that department, it could be a sales target goal, growth goal in terms of entering new markets. So for different departments, for administration, it could be just areas that the company wants to streamline, increase productivity, reduce the amount of wastage in terms of physical resources being used. Sometimes you'll see offices, looking at giving up space or not expanding because the work or maybe the business is facing a downturn. So these are bits and pieces which, review of performance or evaluation allows the company and the management to look into, and that is why performance appraisals or evaluation of performance actually needs to be done. Now let's look at a particular video in terms of one of the methods of let's say performance appraisal. And the reason why we want to look at this is primarily to understand, with a very short video, to see how this is managed or how this works within an organization and why it is done. So let me play this small video.
A performance appraisal or evaluation, as it is sometimes called, is a review by a manager where the employee's work performance is evaluated and strengths and weaknesses are identified so that the employee knows where improvement is needed. Over the years, there have been some new types of reviews that are being met with success in today's business world. These require that evaluation be done not only for raises, promotions, or bonuses, but for an employee's growth and development. These include management by objectives review. This method, often called MBO, measures the employee's accomplishments against a clearly established set of objectives. If managers and employees begin the year by working together to list these objectives, the end-of-year appraisal can simply compare each goal with its final outcome. This method is simple, clear, and empowers employees in the goal-setting process, but it disregards non-goal related success metrics. Rating scale is probably the most common review type. Using this method, a supervisor rates an employee on a numerical scale for a defined set of behaviors, traits, competencies, or completed projects. This method gains points for simplicity and functionality, but it only works well if both managers and employees share the same understanding of each point on the scale. The 360-degree feedback review is a new kind of performance review. It incorporates data from peers, supervisors, and even outside parties like customers and suppliers. This broad feedback can provide a multi-dimensional picture of performance that can cancel the influence of bias. The goal is to paint an accurate picture of employees' strengths and weaknesses. Gathering feedback from multiple sources is a great way to ensure employees are rated fairly and accurately. No matter which type of performance evaluation used, remember the goal is to foster communication between managers and employees. To make your performance reviews as productive as possible, try the following steps. Be prepared. Lead with the positive. Don't be confrontational. Keep it simple. Be consistent. Make it a two-way conversation. Address what's important to the employee. Discuss work and life balance. Be a good listener. Give feedback regularly. To download the review templates mentioned in the...
So as you can see, basically this video has made my job a bit easier because it has covered some of the performance review or performance or evaluation mechanisms which organizations employ within the context of measuring how employees are doing or how staff is performing on goals or the job descriptions which have been set by HR managers. Now, there are lots of different types of performance appraisal techniques which can be used to primarily appraise yourself, or the organization would use essentially to appraise yourself in terms of how you're performing, how you're doing within the organization, whether there are growth prospects. Sometimes this is something which is done at the individual level. and you might not want to share it with your manager or with your organization. And in some cases, the organization does it because they see you as an asset, and obviously somebody who can rise up and take more responsibility and more, help in, let's say, executing more of roles and responsibilities within the organization. And that sets you up, for growth path within the organization by, looking at promotions. And obviously financial reward side of things tend to be bonuses, incentives, holiday trips, lots of different types of incentives which can be given by the company should they feel that the employee is performing well. It is meeting the objectives of the organization. It is helping push forward the organizational agenda. And from that perspective, the organization will also put a lot of things in place to keep you motivated. And in those cases, these kind of motivations which the organization puts in place would be things like promotion, would be things like bonus, would be things like giving additional responsibility, a rise in your salary or career, in terms of title, and in terms of increased responsibility. Sometimes it's a case of company posting people out into other territories, and sometimes people would also go into training and development, like senior management. Sometimes or people who are stepping into management would be sent out to do a program with a prestigious institution which the company would pay for, and that is seen as a training and development cost as far as the organization is concerned. Now, what we want to look at is, by looking at the first assessment criteria, is to explain the data needed to review and make judgments on employee performance. Now, before we get into the specifics of this, we will look at reviewing some of the performance management techniques which are utilized or used by most HR departments within any business organization globally. Now, these are the widely accepted ones. There is one more which I would like to add, and this is something which normally is used in large organizations and for senior management. So balanced scorecard is also a technique which basically looks at mapping the performance of an individual on 4 different things. We'll come to that in a minute. But let's start off by understanding what is KPIs, key performance indicators and metrics. Now, this is the simplest form of appraisal or evaluation which the organization can put in place. And this tends to be looking at how well the company is doing, how well or the business or the project is doing, and in those businesses or projects or segments that you're working in, how are you performing, as an individual on helping the organization meet some of these strategic goals and objectives. Now, one of the things, if I give you an example on this, would be that, say, for example, one of the KPIs that I would have personally set for some of the staff within UK Versity would be that, okay, last year we taught 1,800 students. This year we want to go to 2,000 students. So what I'm defining at the start of, say, a new financial year would be to look at giving some sense to everyone in the organization that we are looking at expanding, we are looking at growing. And what we want to be able to do is increase our number in terms of learners that we want to teach online from a certain number to a certain number. Now, this performance matrix, which has been set forward by management, would be broken down by HR and would be translated or communicated to different sets of people who are looking into business development or sales, essentially, or in marketing. And they would be carrying that additional target to ensure that at the end of the year, when their appraisals is done, one of the key KPIs, key performance indicators in terms of how they have done or how they have fared on achieving those goals and objectives would be to measure if they have been able to bring that increase on with regards to the number of learners studying as it was defined by the management. So KPIs tend to be, small metrics or targets which department heads, managers can put together in consultation with the employees. And they would be setting, delta increase in goals, for example, slight increase in goals or objectives, which would ask the employees to stretch a bit more to be able to achieve those goals and objectives. And in return, normally they are backed off by certain types of incentives or programs, which would, motivate the individuals to achieve those increased or stretch targets, as we call them. So primarily, they are used per se in terms of as a tool for measurement to increase sales or to increase, profit or to increase market share or to basically drive an increase in the performance, basically output of the employee, and they are generally substantiated by adding something to the overall package which the employee receives. Some organizations it could be paid off as a Christmas bonus. In some organizations, it's paid off as a yearly bonus at the end of the year. Should you meet your KPIs, you'll be eligible to receive the bonus, and that is where it is used as one of the tools to drive performance. Now, one of the most common things that we see and talk about, and pretty much it is a practice in all organizations, big, small, big, medium, small. If you are having an HR department or somebody manages the HR function, at the end of the year, there will be performance appraisal which will be conducted. And the performance appraisal will look at various types, depending on the template or the appraisal which has been created within the organization. There are loads of templates which are available, and they tend to measure the employee, on the main bits would be the, the targets which have been given in the job description. That means, are the employees fulfilling their job? As if you're working in customer service and you're in the administration department, say of an organization, what are the key things that you're going to be measured on? And these could be key metrics which are defined in your job description. Is that, have we managed to solve all complaints? Have we received any complaints against the person who's working in this role? And has the person been courteous enough to be able to deal with all the inquiries or pass them to colleagues if she or he is not able to deal with? So these type of appraisals, when I say evaluation of your performance, which is done towards the end of the year, tends to be what is called the performance appraisal. And they could be ranging from getting feedback in terms of how you performed, what you have done good, what you have not done good, or things that you could have done better, things that you have not been able to do because of lack of resources or lack of leadership or lack of guidance from your, your manager. All these things are pretty much noted, through this proposal or through this document, and it is recorded so that areas which are considered as gap areas can actually be, detected, or areas which are going to be areas which basically put you down in terms of performance are going to be noticed by your manager, and they are going to be then put across as training and development, so that you are able to train, you are able to develop, and you're able to sharpen the areas in which you are being let down because of the fact that you don't have the skill or the knowledge, or maybe in some cases resources are not being made available for you to perform in your role that well. Now, apart from looking at performance appraisals or performance reviews, as some organizations would call it, they generally tend to happen at the end of the year. These appraisals typically happen with your manager, the HR department, or somebody as a representative from HR sits in these appraisals. There is obviously a process through which you engage. There is a constructive dialogue between you and your manager. The feedback which is provided from a point of view of things which are going to be in your job description, how you have done, and it is focused primarily on measuring the output that you've been able to provide to the organization in terms of day-to-day activities which have been given and how you performed on those activities. The idea there and thereabouts is primarily to see if you are motivated enough to be in that role. Are you going to continue in that role? Are you going to be able to perform in that role? And if there are things which are lacking from the organizational side, then obviously the employee makes that let your manager know, or obviously talks about it, so that those areas wherein there are gaps, either in terms of knowledge, skill, or resources, are provided so that you're able to do better and your performance stays in line with the expectation of what the manager has or the management has. Now, when we watched the video, it said 360-degree feedback is a bit new, obviously, because that video was made in 2014. 360 feedback has become absolutely important nowadays, although this has been present since the early 19 or late 1990s. But it's practically implemented in organizations which have a huge customer-facing sales force. So in some cases wherein your performance is dependent on the feedback from the customers or the services that you deliver to customers, and then the loop gets closed or the feedback is taken, then in those cases you would look at that companies invest heavily on softwares or types of tools and techniques which are required to capture feedback from peers, colleagues, customers, suppliers, partners, in order to evaluate the overall performance that you do as far as the organization is concerned, or the overall contribution you make towards the organization is possible. Now, in this particular tool, we are looking at, asking mostly outward-facing people who are basically dealing with customers about how did I do, how did I perform, or did I render the service, or did I provide you the service? Did I solve your issue? Did I solve your problem? And these tend to be the reasons of why this feedback is taken, because your performance is dependent on the services that you're providing to customers. Now, call center is a very good example of this, or call center services are a very good example of this. So when at the end of the day, when you call a bank or you call a mortgage company or you call an insurance company and you have certain issues or problems that need to be resolved, the person who's on the other end of the line is expected to resolve that problem, help you solve that issue. And if he or she is able to do that, then obviously the survey or the questionnaire that you get on the phone or on the email, ask for how did the colleague do. And in those cases, they want to get the feedback from the customer, whether the problem was solved or whether the issue was resolved or not. And in those cases, you would look at, the companies are looking at democratizing the process of taking feedback. It is not just what the manager said, it is not just what the company said, but they are also depending on the voice of the customer to get this feedback from the horse's mouth, which is the customer's voice, to say that yes, the person is performing, yes, the person has rendered a service which has led to solving that problem at the customer's end. Now, the reason it is called 360-degree feedback is because it is taking feedback from multiple sources. So in this case, questionnaires could be sent out to colleagues, to direct reportees, to peers, to more senior colleagues, and even to customers or partners and suppliers. And when they respond back, all the responses are collated, and contribution from everybody that you've interacted with or have provided or rendered services to is obtained, and on the basis of that, an accurate picture of your performance is drawn up, and that would constitute what is called a 360-degree feedback. Now, this is normally done in the case, as I mentioned to you, of people who are outward facing. In some organizations, even CEOs and senior management undergo this process. And some of the things which they need to look at when they undergo this process is primarily to have a very good understanding that the aims and objectives of why this feedback is to be collected is very clear. Because unless you explain what is the aim and objective of getting this feedback from different sources, then obviously in some cases the feedback received can be null and void, cannot in some cases cannot be incorporated. So in most cases, when this kind of feedback is sent out or is seeked, what also is done is that the reasons for taking this feedback is explained, and the people who are asked to participate in providing this feedback sometimes then also end up getting what is called a participant information form, or PIF. And this form informs why the company is looking at taking feedback from external customers, direct reportees, peers, senior colleagues, or even customers, and in some cases partners and suppliers as well. So for a purchase manager, this feedback would also come from partner suppliers, and the frequency at which the PO is released, when the payments are processed, they're processed in time. Do the vendors get appropriate notifications in terms of when the checks or payments are issued? They would want, when I say they, the company would want a feedback on the purchase managers dealing with the partners and suppliers, because in this case the purchase manager has the mandate to deal with them and has a certain amount of power which he or she executes on behalf of the company to be able to give out these purchase orders, and in return ensure that goods and services or raw material or whatever it is delivered in time back for the purposes of processing or manufacturing within the company. Then we also look at, management by objective. When we talk about management by objective, what we mean that is that this is generally set for people in the senior management. So here, very quantifiable objectives are specifically discussed, they're agreed on, and when the individual agrees on with these objectives, they are then added on to the overall performance management of the management of the staff or of the employee within the organization. Now, in terms of when we look at MBO as a term, management by objective, when we talk about these in particular, they were, obviously there are lots of reasons of why, this was introduced. This was introduced primarily, sometime in the early I think maybe late 60s, and was basically taken and accepted globally as a technique, to look at how performance of employees could be essentially, managed and monitored on a senior level. So this takes a strategic approach to managing and understanding and reviewing the performance of an employee within the organization. And here the idea of the management by objective is that the goals which the individual needs to agree to are already defined, and they are conveyed to the management or people who are in the management that these are the goals being agreed on with the individual, and the individual has agreed to achieve these objectives over a point in time. Now, one of the steps that generally happens in this case is that the employee's performance is measured on the basis of these macro objectives which have been agreed at the start of the year, or maybe when the individual is taking on the role. Sometimes you would see that this would happen in the case when a CEO of the company is appointed. They are given or set goals which are going to be qualitative goals. Things, for example, improving the image of the organization, the share value of the organization, or in some cases, growing the customer base of the organization. And these are strategic objectives which are set. And in these strategic objectives, the achievement of these objectives is given a longer duration because they need more time for these goals to be achieved. So if the CEO of the appointed organization is looking at customer acquisition, they would be measured on a long-term basis, that how many customers have they acquired, or strategic customers have they acquired, which has brought in business in the hundreds or millions of pounds to the company. So when a company looks at expanding and they take on a new CEO, or maybe a regional CEO for Western Europe or for Eastern Europe, they would be looking at making this strategic appointment on the basis that the company is looking at expanding in that region, and a person coming from that geography would be able to expand the business. And the goals are normally set over a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year time frame. And if the goals are not achieved, then the person or the individual having the contract, it is mentioned in the contract that the person would obviously, the employment would become null and void, or these objectives, if they are not fulfilled, additional things like the employee stock option plan or heavy bonuses which are given out in some cases are going to be restricted to such and such percentage should the objectives not be met. So here, defining the goals of the organization and employee accepting the goals to be able to drive them towards the organization achieving them, and then the continuous monitoring of these goals to see if milestones. Normally in these goals which are set, milestones are also set. So it can't be that you will be able to say, for example, increase the market share of the company from 4 to 10%. Now milestones would be set at 4.5%, 5%, 7%, 8%, and market growth rates will also be looked at. So obviously these objectives are set in tandem and in consultation with the employee or the management, the person who's in the management at the senior level. And this is then continuously monitored and evaluated to see whether these goals and objectives are being agreed or not, and achieved or not, sorry. And this process of agreement of the organizational objectives with the employee taking up those objectives, and then the continuous monitoring process with the employee also having the ability to give feedback. Now, if there is a downturn in the market and recession hits, then all companies will be hit. And obviously in this case, the employee will not be penalized because of the fact that the market conditions are not good. So feedback as a process also works, and the targets are adjusted and then reevaluated and then it helps in achieving the goals of the organization. So these are normally set, in, I would say, organizations which are primarily, large scale organizations, and obviously in which you would generally see that, it is set for the senior management in the company. Now, MBOs, just from a background perspective, were, as a key term used by Peter Drucker, who's considered one of the marketing gurus apart from Philip Kotler globally. And he first popularized them in the late 50s. And this is because when after World War II, industrialization started, lots of production manufacturing companies, in order to reignite the economy, a lot of governments and countries invested into industrialization. And that is where a lot of workforce started to work within factories, and management by objectives as a concept was popularized by him, was introduced by him, and then obviously later on popularized by him. And that allowed, objectives to be met at the company level, with employees buying into those objectives to achieve it. Now, let's look at one of the other types of performance appraisal, which is reward and recognition program. Now, when we talk about pretty much all companies in the place that you work as well, and I'm pretty sure that companies, big, medium, small, it doesn't matter, but all companies have some sort of reward and recognition process in place. It could be in the form of employees completing 5 years of service, getting a certificate from the CEO, 10 years of service, getting a medal, or maybe a watch, or something as a possession in kind from the management of the company. That could be seen as a reward, or that is basically seen as a recognition process. A reward could be if you had an exceptionally good year and you performed exceedingly well. If the target was given as, say, 100 and you achieved 300, you are, obviously financially in some cases rewarded, and also rewarded from a point of view of acknowledgement that the person has achieved superlative performance despite, setbacks, or despite trying economic conditions, and you've excelled well. So there are things which the organization would want to understand. How has this person been able to do so well? So they would look at developing it as a best practice. You would obviously get a bit of a reward, and these rewards can be in the form of promotion, financial rewards. And this is to keep the employee motivated, and to ensure that, people who perform well are also getting the recognition within the organization, to keep their morale high, and also to, obviously making sure that they are able to perform better, and obviously able to keep up with that performance. So rewards and recognitions come in different shapes and form. It could be financial, it could be incentive, it could be holiday driven, it could be training and development, it could be promotion, it could be ad hoc awards. In some companies, you have a chairman's medal if you're doing exceptionally well on certain things in terms of meeting your role and responsibility. There could be various types of rewards which are typically there in organizations depending on their function, utility, and obviously the number of employees based in the organization. Now, you can also look at doing your own appraisal, and that is something we're using the PDP, or personal development plan. And this is a living document which a lot of us maintain. And if your manager is to review it, then it becomes a career professional development plan, or CPD. So, or a career progression plan, essentially, because somebody senior enough, or somebody who's managing you, is basically also having the ability to review that development plan. So when you do it at your level, wherein it is tailored to meet some of the weaknesses that you're trying to improve, or some of the threats that you're trying to mitigate, or change them into opportunities, and you're setting goals for yourself, and obviously setting or undertaking activities to be able to achieve those goals, they would be all documented within a PDP. And a PDP typically tends to be personal, because of the fact that you are the only one who's contributing to adding things to the document, reviewing the document, and then obviously setting new goals and targets in that document, because you are doing the review yourself. Now, in some cases, if this is done, as I mentioned, by your manager or somebody in the HR department, and it becomes a part and parcel of your performance appraisal, they could also, when I say that this document could also be termed as a CPD document, or a career professional development plan document. And this is obviously reviewed every year. You're adding things to it every year. You're taking off things that you've completed, and this keeps you moving towards improving your skills, you improving your knowledge, know-how of the work that you do, and obviously helps you achieve goals and objectives in a much better way because they've been documented and you're receiving support for the activities that you need to undertake to be able to achieve those goals and objectives. And this is for personal growth. This is for self-growth. This is something that you want to become better at. So for example, if I speak French, and this is a language that I like, but I've not had the time to be able to go into and take some professional coaching or join Alliance Française to be able to learn French. But what I'm trying to do is learn it at my own personal level through YouTube videos or through books and flashcards. Then in this case, I'm developing it as a bit of a PDP, as a personal goal that I want to learn this language over a period of 3 years. And I want to refresh my knowledge maybe over a period of 3 years, or move from beginners to an intermediate level in terms of speaking this particular language, but you're not taking any outside help and you're reviewing it and you're setting your own goals and undertaking activities which you're driving yourself. This would be personal development plan. But if you're working within an organization and you are now, the company needs certain individuals within the organization to be able to speak another language because the company has opened up an office there or dealing with customers, and they feel the need that you, if you're in sales or in a particular department, and they feel the need that you need to be able to speak and converse in French, the company organizes a course or a training program through which you start learning the language, and over a point in time, they get you to a beginner's level, to an intermediate level, and this will be documented in your personal development plan so that it is something that you are taking on as a new skill. You're learning a language and obviously helping the company in terms of dealing with the clients who are French or will speak, bilingual English-French or French-English. And this would be done at the company level, which is reviewed. And obviously they are paying for some of the activities and resources which are required for you to learn the language. And in those cases, this would then be a CPD plan instead of a personal development plan. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So when we talk about performance and evaluation of how you're doing within the organization, we are basically going to be looking at measuring, reviewing, evaluating how you are performing in the tasks and activities which are assigned to you either on a day-to-day basis, monthly basis, and yearly basis. So if you have this as a job description and you're reviewed on this on a monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis with one of the attached documents that I've spoken about, whether it's 360-degree feedback, performance appraisal, management by objectives, it could be graphic rating scales sometimes, which are there in the case of software organizations. Some organizations also use the traffic light system, and traffic light system would essentially mean that you're rated red, amber, and green. If you're performing well, everything is going well. So whichever way they look at it, but it's a way of formally evaluating your, how you're doing in your role at the end of the year or at the end of a certain period, and that will be termed as, performance, measurement or performance evaluation. And the data which is coming out of that performance evaluation would be used to put new goals or agree new objectives with you or agree new responsibilities with you in the coming year. And this tends to be done towards the end of the year, end of the financial year, in most cases, in most organizations. And this is to make then, after doing this review, the review is conducted and the HR department or your manager or the department manager is then able to make a judgment on how you have been performing and whether there are areas that you need to improve on, or the organization needs to put you under training and development to be able to improve your productivity and efficiency while you work within that role. Now, if I look at discussing this with, say, the example of Frymark, when we discuss this, so how does, say, for example, the performance review that we talk about for the organization, affect, let's say, how is it related to the appraisal of the employee within the organization? So if we talk about this in particular, what we are looking at is primarily looking into, how the employees working within the office, what kind of output is the employee providing in terms of the role the employee is playing within the organization or in a particular department, and then what kind of feedback is being provided either by the manager, peers, or colleagues when the person works shoulder to shoulder with other peers and colleagues, or members of staff within that particular role in the organization. So when I look at the example of Primark here, what we are trying to basically look at understanding is that if we need to understand what data comes out of these reviews and evaluation, then at some stage this data which comes out can be used to increase or better the performance metrics of the organization. In some cases, the organization would set qualitative goals for the year, and these qualitative goals will have to be met in order to ensure that the organization increase profitability, or in some cases shave off costs, depending on how we structure it, term it in the circumstances. And that is what we will need to explain by doing or by conducting a data review needed to make judgments on performance of employees. So the example that I've taken here is Primark has about 200 outlets in the UK and Ireland in particular, and obviously they are quite successful in terms of driving, let's say, a price point clothing sales across because they're a part of the ABP group, which basically has outsourcing, which has basically outsourced operations to developing countries, and in which they're able to get clothes manufacturing and other bits done at a far more effective cost than some of the organizations in the UK, Ireland, and EU. Now, a couple of years back, the company embarked on a process wherein they wanted to, look at achieving more control over how orders are processed. So when orders are placed online, and this is specifically related to online, when orders are placed online, how the order management system works. And then the order management system, allows their partner suppliers to get access to when the orders are placed, and then the processing or manufacturing of these orders can be done. And then at some stage, transportation logistics back to the customer happens in the country, and a dispatch from the local logistics provider. Now, what they wanted to do was, in order to improve the efficiency of the system, because there were a lot of different people working within different silos. So what happened was, when the website in the UK gets an order, there is a set of people within the department which would get the orders. They would then basically process it, send it to somebody in Vietnam or in Bangladesh, which is an outsourced factory, and they would then provide details of the order being placed. And then from there, the order would be manufactured and then shipped through a third-party supplier, would land up with a logistics provider in the UK, and from there on, the order would be dispatched to the customer. Now, this process was a bit fragmented. So you had 3-4 different departments or types of teams working, and what they decided to do in the company was to set up an internal management system, which would allow these to be seen in real time. And this meant that the company had to invest into IT infrastructure to ensure that when the orders are placed, they are visible to all the 3 different teams in 3 different locations in real time. And this would save time and cost in terms of communication, in terms of replication of some of the duties which were being done by people in the UK, and then people in factory in Bangladesh or Vietnam, and then when it came back to the logistics provider. So here, the idea was to do a comprehensive review and see what are the clear points in terms of data and communication which needs to be done. Company decided to invest into and creating what is called the internal management system, which allows these orders to be, which basically allows information on these orders to be shared in real time across 3 different locations. And this basically looks at, the logistics company, for example, Argo, gets the orders, they get a notification, and then they are ready to accept the order when it comes in for dispatch. And this helped streamline the operations, both in terms of physical resources by use of technology, but also not just in terms of physical resources, but also in terms of coordination, which was required to be done between the 3 different places and internationally. So from that point, when we look at the data which is collected and how this was collected, because somebody in the company decided to conduct a review, that how could we streamline this process from, say, and I'm just plucking a number from the air, say from 3 days down to 1 day, or from 1 day down to a few hours. And this was possible because somebody decided to conduct a full comprehensive review to see where the original information originates, where all it needs to go to, how the coordination happens, and what are the number of departments or people involved in in tackling this particular information or dealing with this particular order. And then a system was put in place with the help of physical resources, with the help of technology, and obviously with the help of training and development. And what they did was they created a new system called Unit 4 in the company, and obviously the approach was adopted across all different 200 outlets. So when the orders were placed even in the shop or in the outlets, these orders were directly communicated across to Unit 4, and they had the system, the technology, and the ability to be able to distribute these orders to different suppliers who would ensure that the delivery times were cut down from 7 days to 3 days for the order when it's placed online or within the store. And this has led to, obviously, Primark increasing its business. So a review of the process and a review of who all are involved with the evaluation in terms of what inputs are required was done. And this allowed the company to streamline and obviously increase its efficiency in terms of placing the order from the date that you place to the date being delivered to the customer. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, in the second learning assessment criteria of this learning outcome, we are expected to understand what is the data needed to review and then make judgments on the utilization of physical resources. So here, I have looked at the example of Marks and Spencer, and obviously what Marks and Spencer has done over the years is that it has launched something called a Plan A. Have you heard about a Plan A?
No.
Okay. Plan A for Marks and Spencer is basically a strategic document, which is a plan for the company to be becoming carbon neutral, reducing the amount of waste going to landfills, and basically becoming a company which has operations primarily ensuring that there is absolute sustainability in terms of whatever they do, and they don't produce their waste. If they produce the waste, they are able to then recycle that waste and bring it back into the company's set of operations. Now, this plan, I think, if I remember correctly, was initially proposed by Sir Stuart Rose, who was the chairman of the company, I think, way back in 2007, 2008. And this plan was primarily proposed as a strategic plan in order to streamline operations of the company, because it has an operation in 14 different countries internationally. And the idea thereabouts was to ensure that everybody understands that the sustainability side of things, which is what Marks and Spencer wants to drive, which is the Plan A. That means they want to make better choices to ensure that Marks and Spencer and the resources that they use within, say, the food side of things, Marks and Spencer food, the clothing side of things, which is what they drive, they are trying to ensure that we are able to reduce any wastage of the precious resources which they utilize and from the earth, and whether it's coming through them directly or through their partners and suppliers. And this is going to help the company become carbon neutral, or basically, produce its own, meet its own requirements for energy, for production, and, for facilities, and ensuring, that it is basically not producing any waste. If it does produce, then this waste is recycled, and they can bring it back into their own production and offset this, with regards to reutilizing that raw material. So basic bits were in terms of being carbon neutral. Basic bits were in terms of being able to reduce waste, which is going to landfill, and to streamline its operations in a way, wherein the employees, every employee working within the organization would be evaluated on Plan A. That means, what is your contribution towards driving sustainability? What is your contribution towards driving carbon neutrality? What is your contribution in your role and your responsibilities that you execute, wherein you try and reduce the waste which is generated in Marks and Spencer in its operations, and that waste becoming less and less, so that it is sending less of that to landfill for recycling or for doing away with. So this plan was created by the management and was then incorporated into any employee which works within the Marks and Spencer as an organization has to sign up to this agenda. And your training, your development, your remuneration, your incentive and recognition is all linked to this planning. Is that okay? So it is being driven at the organizational level, at the very top level by the leadership, and then it has been broken down into key result areas for employees, from staff, for different types of staff, whether it's operational staff, administrative staff, management staff, managerial staff. It is broken down into targets which are incorporated in their job descriptions, and this allows everyone working within Marks and Spencer to understand that we need to utilize precious physical resources in a very diligent manner. And this plan, there's a big report which is available in every year when Marks and Spencer publishes its annual general report. There is a reference to this plan because this is a 25-year plan which the management has signed off. And what they want to be able to do is to drive sustainability through the organization, and it is linked to the performance of the individual within the organization. So from our perspective, when we look at data which is collected to review the data which is going to be collected, in this case for performance appraisal for the employee, would be related to ensuring that is the employee taking enough steps to help further the agenda of sustainability, carbon neutrality, reducing the amount of waste going to landfill, and helping in recycling, and ensuring that Marks and Spencer is able to meet its energy needs by 2050. Are they furthering that agenda? And if that agenda is being furthered, then the employee is being benefited from a point of view of training and development, in terms of its remuneration package, incentives and recognition which they have been given. And that is what a company would want when they look at judgment on physical utilization of basically utilization of physical resources. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So here the core crux of the task is to understand how does Marks and Spencer look at utilization of resources within the organization. And what they've done is, in order to ensure that everybody sings from the same songbook, they've incorporated this in every employee's job description, and every employee's appraisal plan at the end of the year, when they are reviewed, when they are evaluated, when they are basically measured against the objectives which have been set. They have to come and they have to basically meet some of the criteria on sustainability, carbon neutrality, waste being sent to the landfill, and obviously how they are helping the organization maintain this agenda at the corporate level. Now, if we go across to the last assessment criteria, which is merit, which talks about evaluate how resource management practices have contributed to business success or failure. So here, if we look at the two examples that I've taken in task 4.1 and 4.2, Primark and Marks and Spencer, what we need to be able to look at is evaluate. When it says evaluate, that means now that you know what is planning, how would you evaluate whether this is working or not working? One of the things that I would do is basically go in and look at the latest annual general report of Marks and Spencer and see where they have mentioned the achievement of objectives with regards to planning. And when you look at that, that would basically be the proof of the pudding in terms of seeing whether what they mentioned is actually being done or is not being done. So in those cases, when we talk about the evaluation of whether they are seeing the success of, when I say success, is the organization benefiting in terms of profitability, in terms of less resources being used, in terms of costs being minimized, in terms of ensuring that people which are fit for purpose to work within the organization stay, and the ones which are being recruited from this mindset that they would need to sign up to this particular agenda of the organization. And that is where the evaluation will be. Now, do we see this being a success for Marks and Spencer? Yes, if we do read the report, say, for example, if I open this particular report and then if I say that if you look at this particular report, it will show and talk about, a basis of why the company is basically making strides, and obviously looking at achieving some of the goals and objectives which have been set. So in this report, they are basically talking about how resource management practices are contributing to success of Marks and Spencer and the operations that it has in 14 countries, and how the company is restructuring to come out of, a couple of years back, Marks and Spencer has been extremely profitable. It is one of the signature companies that we have in the UK, which is a flag bearer of, UK across the globe. Now, a couple of years back, they reported their first loss. And some of these bits, when I say they reported the first loss, is because they expanded too quickly, or whatever reasons were. I'm going as per my knowledge. They expanded too quickly into too many countries, and obviously in some of the countries they did not understand the cultural nuances and did not have the right set of operations for products and services, and that is where they did not make profit. Sorry, once again. Excuse me. And because they were not culturally aligned to do the business in those countries, the overall group actually made a loss. Now, in some cases, the management decided, and what they did was they did away with some of the operations in these countries, and they started to enforce this Plan A agenda, which is to reinvigorate Marks and Spencer and put the company back into its growth path. And this Plan A basically then, was realigned with the management objectives, realigned with the employees working within the organization, and now it has started to deliver. So it has been going for a couple of years, and obviously every year when when they report on the measurements in terms of the goals and objectives they have set, and whether these are contributing towards the success or failure of the business, can be evaluated, can be seen from this particular report. So if you take up this example of Marks and Spencer and Plan A, and if you see whether they are being successful, so food waste, you look at progress, you look at packaging, you look at waste to landfill has already become zero in 2019, 2020. So some of the goals and objectives which have been set, they are now achieving those goals and objectives, which were set way back, I think in 2008. And the company is obviously realizing some of the benefits of implementing Plan A across the board. And this is contributing towards the success of the business. So maybe taking an example from the report for one of the things like Marks and Spencer. I know Marks and Spencer for a couple of things. So Marks and Spencer food, premium dining. You look at Marks and Spencer clothing, and then there is Marks and Spencer online. Obviously, there are other aspects of Marks and Spencer in terms of the brands it owns. If you pick out any one example and then you review it through the report and write it back for the purposes of completing this task, it will help you evaluate how the management practices have contributed to the business success, in this case, for Marks and Spencer. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I put the link of this report here. This could be done for any other, organization which is suggested in the indicative content, which could be either Amazon, Carillion, some of the others which have been mentioned, like Sports Direct, JD Sport, whatever it is, Ryanair, whichever one you're comfortable with, you can pick that up, look at the annual journal report of the organization, and from that report, see the targets which have been set for resource management, which could be physical resources, human resources, financial resources, administrative resources. Pick out one particular resource. It could be IT resource, for example. Pick out one particular resource and see if that is contributing towards the success or failure. And giving and talking about that through an example would help you accomplish the merit task.
Okay, then. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, bro.
Good stuff. So any questions on today's session?
No, I don't think so.
Right. So what I'm going to do is obviously have a copy of this presentation and the recording available, on Moodle, and then I'll add the plan of the Marks and Spencer report just as a download, because it's something which I've done already, just for reading purposes, along with this particular learning outcome.
Okay, brilliant.
Good stuff. So we'll meet up next week for discussing the assignment for this particular unit. Until then, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email, and I will try and upload one or two handouts with regards to performance appraisal techniques, balance scorecard, which would be helpful for additional reading.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that.
Okay, take care. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
You too. Bye. Bye.